The radiation sirens screamed a lethal red, yet nobody in the bunker died. I didn't build a better filtration system. I just bled into our only water supply. Want to know why my blood was the only cure? Because if those reinforced steel doors failed, the mutated scavengers howling outside would slaughter all 45 of them in minutes. By the end of this video, you'll understand why true survival means becoming more toxic than the wasteland itself. Did I ask to be the savior of Shelter 84? No. Did I want to be locked underground with 45 terrified university students when the world ended? No. I was just a janitor doing a late shift in the biology wing. Then the sky burned green. The temperature plummeted to freezing. The nuclear winter arrived not with a boom, but with a silent, suffocating blanket of radioactive snow. Our subterranean haven was designed for 50 people. We had 46. That meant strict rationing. It meant constant paranoia. It meant every single drop of moisture was more valuable than gold. The main filter failed. It happened on the 7th day. A brutal grinding noise echoed through the metal vents. The primary reservoir's purity gauge plummeted from green to yellow, then to a sickly, flashing crimson. Panic erupted immediately. I watched from the corner of the dim cafeteria as the girls realized the grim truth. The surface radiation had seeped into the deep groundwater. Our only drinking source was now a liquid death sentence. "We're going to die," Sarah said. She collapsed against the cold steel table. Her hands trembled. I didn't join the chorus of weeping. I walked toward the maintenance hatch. I needed to see the damage firsthand. I needed to calculate how much time we had before dehydration turned this sanctuary into a mass tomb. The heavy iron will fought my grip, but I forced it open. The foul stench of ozone and heavy metals burned my nostrils. I peered into the murky depths. Something was glowing down there. It wasn't just irradiated sludge. A strange, bioluminescent fungus had breached the concrete casing, thriving on the toxic runoff. I reached down to take a physical sample. My boot slipped on the slick metal grating. I plunged into the freezing, poison water. The extreme shock paralyzed my lungs. I swallowed a massive mouthful of the lethal liquid. My vision blurred as I scrambled back up the rusted ladder, coughing violently onto the grating. According to the government survival manuals, my internal organs should have started shutting down within hours. I should have been bleeding from my eyes. I sat there in the heavy dark, waiting for the end. "Are you infected?" Elena asked. "Stay back," I said. "You drank it, didn't you?" I said stay back. I didn't know it yet, but that freezing plunge was the moment I stopped being entirely human. It was the beginning of the dark transformation. The pain hit me a moment later. A searing heat traced its way through my veins, starting from my stomach and radiating outward. A blue, semi-transparent text box flickered in my peripheral vision. Toxin detected isotope 9. Purification protocol initiated. The notification wasn't just floating text. It was accompanied by an agonizing cramp that folded me in half. My bones felt like they were vibrating against my muscles. I gasped for thin air, tasting heavy copper and ash. The system was forcibly rewriting my biology to neutralize the threat. For a moment, I thought my heart would explode. The pain peaked, blinding me with white-hot agony. Then the torture vanished completely. A wave of profound, unnatural energy washed over my chest. I breathed deeply. I felt perfect. Better than perfect. I looked at my hands. The veins beneath my skin pulsed with a faint, strange violet hue before fading back to normal. The system was feeding me immense strength, but the purified poison had to go somewhere. It felt heavy, settling deep within my marrow like a coiled steel spring. I ignored the strange sensation. Survival came first. I wiped my mouth and stood up. The 45 students were gathered in the main hall, their eyes hollow with despair. The bunker's self-appointed leader, Elena, was trying to maintain some semblance of order. She held a damaged clipboard like a plastic shield. "We have enough bottled reserves for 2 days, Elena said, her voice shaking. "After that, we have nothing." I stepped out of the shadows of the maintenance corridor. The water dripping from my soaked clothes left dark puddles on the concrete floor. I walked past the terrified murmurs and straight toward the auxiliary tank. I needed to test a wild theory. The system stated it purified toxins. If I could survive drinking the contaminated water, maybe my body was the living filter we desperately needed. Was it madness to cut my own palm and let the blood drip into the secondary supply? Perhaps. But sanity died the day the bombs fell. I grabbed a utility knife from the rusted workbench. The blade was dull, but it did the job. A sharp sting, and crimson droplets fell into a small glass beaker of the glowing, irradiated water. I held my breath. The chemical reaction was instantaneous. The moment my blood touched the toxic sludge, it hissed violently. The sickly green glow dissolved. The murky liquid turned crystal clear. I stared at the glass, mesmerized by the sheer impossibility of the sight. My blood didn't just resist the deadly poison. It destroyed the threat, cleansed the water. I drank the purified liquid from the beaker. Tasted like cold mountain springs. No warning. No sickness. I had the cure. The heavy revelation hit me like a physical blow. I could save them. All of them. But there was a brutal catch. To purify enough water for 46 people every single day, I would have to bleed constantly. I would become a living, breathing filtration machine. And they could never know the truth. If they knew my blood was the only thing keeping them alive, fear would turn them into desperate animals. They would chain me to the reservoir. I walked back into the main hall. Elena was still trying to calm the weeping masses. Cleared my throat. All eyes turned toward me. I fixed the secondary pipe, I said, lying smoothly. We have clean water. Absolute silence fell over the crowded room. Then, a collective sigh of immense relief washed through the gathering. Girls hugged each other tightly. Sarah dropped to her knees, sobbing with pure joy. Elena looked at me, her eyes narrowing with sudden, sharp suspicion. How? Elena asked. The manual said the main filter is irreparable. I bypassed the core, I said. It's a temporary fix. How temporary? I didn't answer. I just walked past her, wrapping a dirty rag around my bleeding hand. I had bought us some precious time, but the cost was steep. As I lay in my cramped bunk that night, listening to the steady breathing of 45 sleeping girls, I felt the violet energy humming in my veins again. The system had saved my fragile life. But I was beginning to realize it wasn't a standard medical tool. Why was the system interface categorized under weapons development instead of medical? I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the subtle, rhythmic throbbing in my bones. The poison wasn't gone. It was just waiting. I was a ticking time bomb, locked in a steel cage with 45 innocent people. Wait, let me rewind. Because I lied about the water situation. I thought I was simply bleeding into the reservoir to keep them alive. But I checked the system interface the following morning in the darkness of the maintenance shaft. The lethal isotope 9 poison wasn't disappearing into nothingness. It was actively accumulating in my bloodstream, stored deep in my cells as a raw, concentrated bioweapon. The system wasn't just a medical filter. It was turning me into a living bomb. I walked back into the cafeteria to observe the group. The girls were passing around plastic cups of the clear, purified water. They looked significantly healthier than the day before. Color had returned to their pale cheeks. For a fleeting second, I felt a rare sense of accomplishment. Then Sarah dropped her glass. It shattered loudly against the hard concrete floor, sending sharp shards everywhere. Blood? Sarah whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the floor. I looked down. My makeshift bandage had soaked completely through. Thick, crimson drops were steadily staining the gray tiles, leaving a clear trail back to my boots. I quickly hid my injured hand behind my back. The metallic smell hung heavily in the stale, recycled air of the bunker. Are you hurt? Elena asked, stepping forward with genuine concern. I slipped on the rusted grating near the tanks, I said. Let me see it, she insisted. Mind your own business. We need everyone healthy. Show me the wound. I said drop it. I turned and walked away, ignoring their worried stares. The physical toll of draining a pint of blood every single day was becoming immense. My vision often blurred at the edges. My limbs felt heavy, dragging like lead weights. I spent my quiet hours raiding the old medical bay for expired saline pouches and iron supplements, desperately trying to replenish what I secretly gave to the auxiliary tank. I found dusty crates of outdated vitamins and swallowed them dry without water. It was a miserable, exhausting existence. But it worked. The water stayed pure. The 45 university students stopped crying and started organizing cleaning rotas and inventory checks. We established a strict routine. We had fragile hope. But hope is a highly dangerous luxury in an underground fallout shelter. Why was the system hoarding the toxic energy instead of expelling it? I found the terrifying answer on day 14. I was executing my usual security patrol near the sealed Sector C doors. This lower area was strictly off-limits, marked with heavily faded biohazard warnings from decades before the war. The thick steel barricade was wrapped in heavy iron chains from the outside. I pressed my ear against the freezing metal surface. A low, rhythmic thudding echoed from the pitch-black depths on the other side. Someone or something was down there, and it was methodically trying to get out. I didn't know it yet, but every drop of toxic blood I stored was preparing me for what was waiting in the dark. I backed away slowly, my sweaty hand resting on the hilt of my dull utility knife. Suddenly, the bunker's main emergency alarms blared. Searing red warning lights bathed the concrete corridors in a bloody, pulsating glow. I sprinted back toward the main living hall, my boots pounding against the floor. For a terrifying second, I thought the water filtration unit had finally collapsed completely. Then I saw the heavy barricade at the primary surface entrance. The thick metal hinges were physically buckling inward under immense pressure. The mutated scavengers weren't just howling at the wind anymore. They had found a massive battering ram. The girls screamed in sheer terror as a deep dent formed in the unyielding steel door. We were entirely defenseless against a brute force attack. We possessed no firearms, no military explosives, just 45 terrified students and a janitor who was slowly bleeding himself to death. "They're getting in," Sarah screamed, backing against the far concrete wall. "Grab anything heavy," Elena commanded, picking up a heavy steel wrench. "Pipes? Chairs? Anything. It won't be enough to stop them," I said, stepping past her. "Do you have a better idea?" she yelled, her voice cracking. "Yes. Stay behind me and don't move." I stood my ground as the main door hinges finally snapped with a deafening crack. The heavy metal plate crashed to the floor, kicking up a blinding cloud of radioactive dust. A monstrous creature lumbered into the flickering light. It used to be a normal surface bear, perhaps, but the atmospheric isotope 9 had twisted it into a towering nightmare of exposed bone plates and glowing green veins. It roared, spraying highly toxic, acidic saliva across the floor. The blue system text flared violently in my peripheral vision. "Hostile entity detected. Weaponization protocol unlocked." How exactly does one weaponize their own bloodstream? I didn't have time to philosophize. The massive beast charged forward. I ripped the dirty rag off my hand, exposing the unhealed gash. I squeezed my fist tightly, forcing the fresh blood to flow freely down my fingers. The creature lunged directly at my exposed throat. I dodged to the right, slashing my utility knife deeply across my own palm to widen the cut, and thrust my violently bleeding hand straight into the mutant's open, roaring mouth. The beast clamped its massive jaws down on my left forearm. A sickening crunch echoed through the silent hall. Blinding pain flared, white-hot and agonizing. I felt the jagged teeth grinding against my bone. My legs almost buckled. The system's text glowed bright red: forearm laceration severe. Toxin release authorized. I didn't need the notification to tell me I was dying. I could feel my flesh tearing. But I didn't scream. I grinned through the agony. The moment my concentrated, mutated blood mixed directly with the creature's internal organs, the chemical reaction was explosive. The beast shrieked in sudden pain, violently releasing my shattered arm. Its glowing green veins instantly flashed a violent, sickly shade of dark purple. The purified poison I had been secretly hoarding acted as a highly corrosive, biological acid against its mutated cellular structure. The creature collapsed heavily onto its side, convulsing wildly before practically melting into a steaming pile of organic sludge right on the cafeteria floor. The horrific stench of burning meat filled the room. Dead silence returned to the bunker. I stood there, clutching my mangled, profusely bleeding arm, breathing in ragged gasps. The 45 girls stared at me in absolute, frozen horror. I wasn't just a simple janitor to them anymore. I was a terrifying unknown. But as I stared down at the creature's dissolving remains, I noticed something shiny resting in the steaming sludge. I kicked the goo aside with my boot. It was a heavy metallic collar, equipped with a blinking red tracking light. Why would a wild, brainless surface mutant wear a military tracking collar? The red tracking light on the heavy collar blinked with a steady, mocking rhythm. I picked up the metallic band, feeling its unnatural mass. It was entirely spotless, contrasting sharply with the highly acidic sludge melting into the gray tiles around my boots. This wasn't about saving ourselves from random, wandering wildlife anymore. It was about surviving a coordinated hunt. Someone on the surface knew we were hiding down here. They had deliberately sent a bioengineered beast to test our perimeter defenses. The subterranean bunker wasn't a forgotten sanctuary left over from the old world. It was an actively monitored cage, and we were the disposable lab rats. What exactly is that?
Elena whispered.
She stepped carefully around the smoking, dissolving corpse, her eyes wide with fresh terror. A leash, I replied grimly, wiping the poisonous residue onto my pants. For that terrible monster? For us? I rubbed the smooth steel casing with my thumb. A faded corporate logo was laser-etched into the metal apex genetics. I knew that name from reading the dusty archives in the biology wing. They were the original, secretive architects of this entire underground facility. But why would the wealthy creators send a mutated monstrosity to violently breach their own reinforced vault? And more importantly, what exactly were they trying to aggressively reclaim? My left arm throbbed with blinding, white-hot agony, snapping my focus back to reality. The savage bite had torn through thick muscle and aggressively scraped the underlying bone. The blue system interface flashed urgently in my peripheral vision, demanding immediate attention. Critical blood loss detected. Toxin reserves critically depleted. Recommend immediate assimilation. I didn't know what cellular assimilation meant, but I knew I was bleeding out rapidly. I grabbed the tracking device and turned back to the 45 terrified students huddled in the dim hall. Pack whatever you can physically carry, I ordered. My voice was tight, strained heavily by the agonizing pain. Take the canned food, the thermal blankets, and all the medical supplies. Where are we going? Sarah asked. Her pale hands were shaking violently as she gripped her torn canvas backpack. Down into Sector C. The lower levels are permanently sealed. Elena argued, stepping directly into my path. Those doors are marked as lethal biohazard zones. Did I care about ancient warning labels painted 30 years ago? No. Did I have any other tactical choice available? Absolutely not. The ruined front entrance was wide open to the freezing, radioactive winter. It was only a matter of short time before the creature's armed handlers followed the blinking signal straight into our living quarters. We had to descend deeper into the suffocating darkness. I didn't know it yet, but dragging those innocent girls into the forbidden depths was the crucial, terrifying choice that would eventually demand the final whisper. We moved with desperate speed. The girls gathered the meager supplies in panicked, terrified silence. I led the fragile human caravan down the spiraling, unlit concrete stairs. The thick iron barricade blocking Sector C loomed ominously ahead in the shadows. I raised my bloody, uninjured hand, gripped the large steel wrench tightly, and violently smashed the rusted locking mechanism. The ancient lock shattered instantly into pieces. I pushed the massive double doors open with my shoulder. Cold, stale air rushed out to greet us. The emergency backup lights flickered to life automatically, illuminating the space sequentially. The hallway ahead wasn't a ruined, irradiated wasteland filled with decay. It was a pristine, highly advanced laboratory corridor. Large glass observation rooms lined the sterile, bright white walls. It's flawlessly clean, Sarah breathed softly, stepping cautiously onto the highly polished floor. Way too clean, I muttered, my eyes scanning the ceiling for automated turrets. Look at the computers, Elena said. She pointed toward a glowing terminal inside the nearest glass-walled room. The screens are still running. Do not touch anything. We could use them to call for outside help. There is no help coming. I leaned heavily against the cold, unyielding glass pane, my vision swimming dangerously. The excruciating pain in my mangled arm was finally becoming unbearable. My knees buckled under my exhausted weight. I collapsed heavily onto the pristine floor, desperately clutching my profusely bleeding limb. The students rushed forward in a chaotic, panicked wave, but I waved them off weakly. Get back, I hissed through tightly gritted teeth. The system interface violently hijacked my entire vision, turning the world a blinding shade of neon blue. Assimilation protocol triggered, converting residual isotope 9 into rapid cellular regeneration. A surge of violent, freezing energy suddenly erupted from my chest. It flooded directly into my shattered arm like a rushing river of ice. I watched in horrified, silent fascination as the torn muscle fibers visibly knit themselves back together right beneath my skin. The jagged, broken bone set itself with a sickening, audible crack. In less than 10 agonizing seconds, the gruesome, fatal wound was entirely gone. It was replaced by smooth, unblemished skin, marked only by a faint, glowing violet scar. The extreme physical pain vanished instantly. I possessed full, perfect mobility again. We had found a hidden, secure haven, and my fatal injury was miraculously healed. I stood up slowly, experimentally flexing my newly repaired fingers. The raw, terrifying physical power coursing through my veins was highly intoxicating. We had successfully survived the mutated beast. We had safely breached the highly secure lower levels without triggering any automated alarms. For a brief, shining moment, I genuinely believed we held the ultimate tactical advantage. The exhausted girls began to smile, setting down their heavy canvas bags with collective, relieved sighs. Sarah even laughed nervously, leaning casually against the main security console desk. Then, the massive central monitor abruptly flickered to life. The cheerful green standby text on the screen vanished. It was replaced by a live, high-definition video feed transmitted directly from the upper cafeteria. A squad of heavily armored corporate soldiers, clad in matte black environmental suits, stood menacingly among the dusty ruins of the main entrance. Their imposing leader held a massive, highly modified plasma rifle. He wasn't aiming at the dark, empty corridors. He was aiming directly at a small, terrified figure kneeling in the radioactive rubble. In the chaos of our desperate escape, one of the younger students had been carelessly left behind. Every brutal choice I had made was inevitably leading to that single defining word. The armored leader slowly reached up and tapped his helmet radio. "I know you're watching." His distorted, mechanical voice echoed loudly through the laboratory's hidden speakers. "Bring us the isotope carrier, or she dies in 60 seconds. Why did the system interface suddenly classify the hostage as an acceptable tactical loss? The 60-second countdown echoed through the sterile laboratory. I stared at the main monitor. The heavily armored commander pressed his modified rifle against the crying student's head. "I have to go up there," I said. "You can't," Elena shouted, grabbing my jacket. "They'll kill you. If I stay, she dies. If I surrender, they might let her live." I shoved her hands away and walked back toward the dark stairwell. I didn't run. I climbed the concrete steps, my hands raised in surrender. I stepped into the ruined cafeteria. The corporate soldiers instantly surrounded me. The commander laughed, lowering his rifle. He kicked the back of my knees, forcing me onto the floor. I offered no resistance. This was the false defeat they expected from a pathetic janitor. But as he leaned close, his helmet visor retracting to reveal a scarred face, he revealed the devastating truth. "We aren't taking you to a lab," the commander whispered. "Your mutated bone marrow is the ignition key. We need it to activate the terraforming engine beneath this bunker. Once it starts, the surface atmosphere will ignite, burning away all remaining life. And those 45 girls downstairs? They are the biological batteries required to sustain the engine's core. This wasn't about extracting a cure. It was about fueling global genocide. The commander pulled a long tactical blade. Hold still. I need a preliminary sample. He sliced deeply into my uninjured shoulder. He expected the clear, purified blood that kept my bunker alive. But I didn't give him the cure. I mentally commanded the system interface purification protocol reversed. Release concentrated isotope 9. I whispered one word: burn. The raw nuclear winter I had stored in my cells violently erupted. Thick, pitch-black blood sprayed directly into the commander's unsealed environmental suit. The reaction was catastrophic. He shrieked as the highly corrosive bio-acid instantly melted his flesh from the inside out. His armor hissed, dissolving into a steaming puddle of molten slag. The remaining soldiers panicked. They raised their rifles, firing blindly into the toxic smoke. But the violent release of raw energy had accelerated my reflexes far beyond human limits. I moved through the chaotic crossfire like a shadow. I grabbed a dissolving plasma rifle from the screaming commander and fired, reducing the corporate squad to ash in seconds. Silence returned. I stood in the cafeteria ruins, coated in toxic residue. I had saved them all. That day, I learned that true survival isn't about resisting the poison. It's about letting the venom consume you until you become the most toxic thing in the room. And the most powerful weapon isn't a sword, it's knowing what to whisper when no one is listening. The commander's melted radio suddenly crackled with static. A cold, mechanical voice spoke from the orbital command channel. Retrieval team unresponsive.
Inițiată sector de purja.
But Sector D wasn't marked on any of the facility's architectural blueprints. What exactly had Apex genetics buried beneath the bedrock?